The Natalie Wood mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good. For 4 decades, the death of Natalie Wood has been described as a tragic accident. A beautiful movie star who slipped from her yacht into dark waters off Catalina Island one November night in 1981. That version of events, at first accepted by authorities and the public alike, framed her death as a random tragedy, a terrible mishap that cut short a brilliant life and legendary career. But beneath this convenient narrative lies a disturbing collection of inconsistencies, changing testimonies, and forensic evidence that tells a very different story. Today we examined the troubling truth behind one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. The death of Natalie Wood was not the simple accident that we have been led to believe. From unexplained bruises to conflicting accounts, from delayed emergency calls to reopened investigations, the real story of what happened on the yacht Splendor that night reveals a dark chapter in Hollywood history that powerful figures have worked for decades to keep hidden. What you're about to learn will completely change how you think about not just Natalie Wood's tragic end, but also the forces that created and maintained a sanitized version of events increasingly contradicted by evidence. The mystery of Natalie Wood's death is not a mystery anymore, but the truth it reveals is more than most people are prepared to accept. The night of November 28, 1981, seemed routine enough. A holiday weekend boat trip to Catalina Island aboard the yacht Splendor with actress Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, her Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. By the next morning, Wood's body would be found floating in the water, and a hastily constructed narrative about an accidental drowning would begin taking shape, a narrative that has been unraveled thread by thread in the decades since. If we are to understand what happened to Natalie Wood, we must look at 6 critical elements of evidence pointing not to a tragic accident, but to something far more sinister. So well hidden was the truth about Natalie Wood's final hours that their troubling questions remain unanswered despite decades of investigation. First, she was found floating face down, but her injuries did not match that story. On the morning of November 29, 1981, Natalie Wood's body was found in the Pacific Ocean, about a mile from the yacht Splendor. She was dressed only in a nightgown and a down jacket, which certainly didn't fit someone consciously going in a small boat, although superficially it might have been plausible in an accidental fall. The first reports from people on board were that Wood had slipped while trying to tie the yacht's dinghy, which had been knocking against the hull. The Los Angeles County coroner originally took that explanation for what happened and labeled her death an accidental drowning. However, physical evidence told a different story. Forensic experts noted decades later that fresh bruises on Wood's arms, legs, and face were inconsistent with a fall. Defensive scratches on her forearms suggested she had tried to protect herself during a confrontation. Bruises on her wrists and forearms appeared to be grab marks, indicative of forceful restraint. Her down jacket was unzipped, that is, it was possibly thrown on hastily rather than being worn deliberately. Several fingernails were broken, indicating she had frantically grabbed something or someone before entering the water. Her blood alcohol level, though elevated, was not high enough to impair judgment significantly. The evidence collectively pointed to a physical altercation before Wood ended up in the water, challenging the narrative of a simple accident. Second, there were numerous changes in the story of her husband, Robert Wagner. Wagner's accounts of events aboard the Splendor have dramatically changed over the years, further fueling suspicion. He first said that he was below deck watching television, and he only knew Wood was missing when he went to their stateroom around midnight. He assumed that she had taken the dinghy alone, even though it is documented that Wood was afraid of water, and it wasn't even plausible for her to do such an act. As investigations continued, Wagner conceded there were tensions aboard the yacht, at first downplaying them as minor, but later admitting, both in interviews and in his 1986 memoirs, that he had a heated argument with Walken that evening. By 2008, Wagner further revised his account to admit that he argued directly with Wood, fueled by jealousy over her relationship with Walken, though he insisted the argument ended before she disappeared. Over time, Wagner's explanations for his delayed notification of authorities began to change. He first stated he felt she must have gone ashore. He later claimed he was concerned, but said he didn't know what to do, which is an unlikely scenario for such an experienced boater. With each revision came increased conflict and tension, yet he was not acknowledging any involvement in Wood's death. This kind of incremental acknowledgement of suspicious information is known to investigators as distancing behavior, a slow admittance of questionable information when confronted with evidence. In 2011, these discrepancies and new evidence led the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to name Wagner as a person of interest in Wood's death, now indicating that he indeed has information pertinent to the investigation. Since then, Wagner has declined to speak with any investigators, a far cry from his initial cooperation, and a silence that begs the question of why someone innocent would refuse to help determine how his wife so tragically died. 3. Christopher Walken was there, but said almost nothing. Of the 3 survivors from that fateful night aboard the Splendor, Walken perhaps remains the most enigmatic figure. The co-star of Wood in the science fiction film Brainstorm, which at the time of her death was still in production, Walken had been invited on the Thanksgiving weekend boat trip as a gesture of hospitality by Wagner and Wood. His presence on the yacht is undisputed, but his near total silence about what happened that night has fueled decades of speculation and suspicion. In the aftermath of Wood's death, Walken gave a very brief statement to investigators that revealed virtually nothing. He confirmed being aboard the yacht, but claimed to have gone to bed early and neither saw nor heard anything untoward during the night. This remarkably lean statement was characterized by investigators as being curiously rehearsed, as if pre-prepared rather than a spontaneous recollection. After this initial statement, Walken retreated into nearly 4 decades of silence. He has constantly refused interview requests about Wood's death, avoided discussing the subject in broader career conversations, and made himself unavailable to investigators reopening the case in recent years. When occasionally cornered by journalists, his responses have been terse and opaque, acknowledging the tragedy without offering substantive information. One investigator summarized the situation succinctly. Of the 3 people on that boat, only Wagner and Davern came back with a story. The theories about Walken's silence abound. The first is that attorneys instructed him to say nothing that might implicate him in what could have been a criminal case. Indeed, documents reveal that Walken hired criminal defense attorneys almost immediately after Wood died. Another theory is that he was too afraid of Wagner, who, as a Hollywood heavyweight, was seen in a state of extreme anger that night. Captain Dennis Davern would later testify that Wagner had become incensed at perceived closeness between Walken and Wood during filming. A more sympathetic interpretation says Walken chose discretion to protect Wood's legacy and her family and not to say anything that would cause further hurt. Walken's silence is especially critical because he was apparently the last person, aside from Wagner, to have seen Wood alive. Reconstructions suggest that he witnessed at least part of the fiery argument between Wagner and Wood, and his insight could illuminate her state of mind and what happened on the yacht during those last hours. Even when the case reopened in 2011, his cooperation with the investigators has been limited, without the rich observations that would have shed light on what exactly happened. There is a dissonance in the fact that Walken has had a prolific Hollywood career since 1981, but has refused to discuss that night. He has become, in effect, a silent participant in the story, silent out of legal caution or fear or respect, and has kept a vital piece of the jigsaw locked away. For the captain of the boat spoke up for the first time and blamed Wagner. For almost 3 decades after Wood died, Dennis Davern was the captain of the Splendor, and for the most part corroborated Wagner's version of events. His earliest statements corroborated the accidental drowning story, and he was publicly loyal to Wagner, who had hired him both before and after the incident. But in 2011, Davern shocked many by suddenly recanting his previous statements and coming forward with new, explosive allegations that directly implicated Wagner in a deliberate cover-up that deceived investigators for 30 years. Davern's revised account, detailed in his 2009 book Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor, co-written with Marty Rowley and further expanded in interviews, painted a disturbing picture of the yacht that night. According to Davern, tensions aboard the Splendor went far beyond mild disagreements Wagner had admitted. Wagner allegedly became increasingly agitated, consumed by jealousy over perceived flirtation between Wood and Walken. After dinner, this jealousy escalated into rage, with Wagner reportedly smashing a wine bottle and accusing Walken of wanting to sleep with his wife. Walken retreated to his cabin while Wood and Wagner continued arguing, with the confrontation intensifying and moving from the salon to the deck, directly contradicting Wagner's claim that disagreements had been settled. The most explosive element of Davern's testimony concerned what happened after the argument moved to the deck. He said the shouting suddenly stopped, followed by eerie silence. When Davern investigated, he found Wagner alone, who told him that Wood was missing and explicitly instructed him not to call for help, saying they should wait and see if she returned. This 4-hour delay in seeking assistance might have denied Wood any chance of rescue if she was alive in the water. Davern further claimed Wagner appeared more concerned with managing the situation than finding his wife, making phone calls, consuming alcohol, and instructing Davern to get his story straight before authorities arrived. Davern's revised testimony clears up some inconsistencies in the original accident narrative. It explains the delayed search despite Wood's known fear of water, accounts for defensive bruises and grab marks found in the autopsy, and puts Wagner's evolving story over the decades into context. Critics have accused Davern of having motives related to money or personal animosity against Wagner, but he said he kept silent earlier because he was intimidated and burdened by guilt. But many of his story details have now been corroborated with physical evidence and witness statements previously unknown when he first came forward. The pattern of bruising, for instance, and reports of hearing a woman in distress from nearby boats. The impact of Davern's testimony was immediate. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation, a reflection of its belief that, indeed, his information warranted a re-examination. Davern's revelations reframed Wood's death from an unfortunate accident to a possible homicide, followed by decades of cover-up. 5. The case was reopened, and what police found was damning. In November 2011, 3 decades after Natalie Wood's death, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department made the unprecedented move to officially reopen the investigation. This rare move for a case long considered closed came in direct response to new information from multiple sources, including Dennis Davern's revised testimony and statements from other witnesses who had remained silent for decades. The new inquiry dramatically transformed the official understanding of Wood's death and raised disturbing questions about how the original investigation had reached such a swift resolution despite major evidence left unaddressed. The reopened investigation started with a comprehensive review of the original autopsy results, using forensic techniques not available in 1981. Led by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, this re-examination concentrated on the pattern of bruising on Wood's body injuries that had previously been identified, but which were never sufficiently explained. Modern forensic analysis showed that many of these bruises were inconsistent with the theory of an accidental fall from the yacht or dinghy. The location, pattern, and depth of contusions on her arms, wrists, and face indicated impact with another person rather than contact with a boat or water. Particularly telling were bruises on her wrists, consistent with restraint, and defensive wounds indicating she had raised her arms to protect herself. Based on this new interpretation, in January 2013, the medical examiner's office changed Wood's cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. This reclassification had the effect of withdrawing the accident ruling that had stood for 3 decades and acknowledged that the physical evidence suggested a more complex and potentially sinister sequence of events. The new report stated specifically that the bruises appeared to have occurred before she went into the water, directly contradicting the long-standing narrative that any injuries were sustained during an accidental fall. This finding confirmed Davern's contention that Wood and Wagner had been in a physical altercation on the yacht's deck shortly before she disappeared. The reopened investigation also explored the long, about 4-hour, lag between when Wood was presumed to have disappeared and when the authorities were called, a time difference that was never satisfactorily accounted for. Other boats in the vicinity, whose witnesses claimed to have heard a woman's cries around midnight, had not been sufficiently interviewed in 1981. The recovered dinghy, which was found beached with its oars neatly stowed, could not have been taken out voluntarily by Wood, yet it had not been appropriately checked for evidence. Furthermore, her body had been released for burial before all forensic tests had been completed, which may have lost vital evidence forever. Most importantly, in February 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department named Robert Wagner as a person of interest, signaling that investigators believed he had information essential to close the case. Wagner's continued refusal to speak with the authorities since the reopening has only heightened suspicion, in sharp contrast to his initially cooperative stance back in 1981. 6. Her sister has fought for decades and insists it was murder. Lana Wood remains a dogged voice in the demand for accountability regarding Natalie's death. Since the night of the tragedy, she has consistently spoken out against the accident narrative and worked to bring into account those whom she felt were responsible. Lana's efforts have been crucial in keeping the case within the public eye and, eventually, having it reopened in 2011. With a deep emotional conviction born of intimate knowledge of her sister, Lana has stated time and again, "My sister didn't drown. She was killed." Lana has said that Natalie would never have willingly gone into the water or tried to go into the dinghy alone at night, as she was deathly afraid of deep, dark water, a condition stemming from a near-drowning incident during the filming of The Green Promise in 1949. She has also illuminated the troubled dynamics of Natalie and Wagner's marriage, including jealousy and controlling behavior, which intensified in the weeks leading up to her death. According to Lana, Natalie confided that she was considering ending the marriage for a second time, providing further context for the tensions aboard the Splendor that fateful weekend. Over decades, Lana has given interviews, written extensively, consulted investigators, and confronted Wagner directly. While skeptics dismiss her as a grieving sister, the reopened investigation has validated many of her claims. Natalie's fear of water, the bruises that indicated a physical altercation, and Wagner's shifting accounts that led to his designation as a person of interest. Lana's advocacy involves inside knowledge, family insight, and dog persistence, keeping the case alive when official attention waned. Taken together, the bruises that contradicted the accident story, Wagner's changing accounts, walk in silence, Davern's explosive testimony, the damning findings from the reopened investigation, and Lana's unwavering advocacy, a disturbing alternative to the accident narrative, comes into focus. The most likely scenario, investigators now believe, involved an escalating argument between Wood and Wagner that turned physical, in which Wood ended up in the water, with a failure to immediately seek help that made rescue impossible. Legal justice may remain elusive because so much time has passed, but at last the historical record can be set right to reflect what the evidence indicates. Natalie Wood's tragic end was not some random misfortune, but rather the result of human actions that went unpunished for more than 4 decades.